Sleigh bells ringing, diamonds blinging, carols singing, favorite season. Sleigh bells ringing, diamonds blinging, carols singing, favorite season. They said, say Nick, what you got up in that bag, yeah. I got racks in my sack or in my bag, yeah. They said, say Nick, what you got up in that bag, yeah. I got racks in my sack or in my bag, yeah. Frozen, neck is frozen, catch me rolling.
All right, our top five segment this week is the top five offenses in NFL history. This is going to be a really, really fun segment. We're ranking the top five offenses, each of us individually, that has ever played in the NFL. I'm going to get us going, Maya, since I'm already talking, then I'll let you chime in where needed, and then we'll go through your list.
Sure.
So, all right, number five for me, this one kind of stinks, and I got to say this out loud. This is the 1983 Washington Redskins. So this was Joe Theismann at quarterback. This was John Riggins at running back. Riggins set the NFL record for rushing touchdowns in a year with 24 that season. This was the first time in NFL history a team scored 500 points in a season. They absolutely obliterated teams in a very competitive NFC. Remember, the Dallas was still good. San Francisco was coming up and comer. They'd already won a Super Bowl in 1981. The Giants were getting better with Lawrence Taylor. This was a very, very tough time in the NFC, and Washington ran right through everybody. It was the most dominant season anyone had seen in NFL history up until a heartbreaking upset loss to the Raiders in the Super Bowl that season. This was the first team, like I said, to break 500. They were balanced. They ran the ball. They threw the ball. This was sort of an introduction to the offensive age in the 80s, right? Because there was the Dwight Clark and the catch in 1981 with the 49ers, but that was sort of new. 49ers West Coast offense was up and coming. The Redskins with that power football and that play action game with Joe Theismann, they were kind of the first offense explosion in the decade that brought forth modern offensive football. So number four for me, this is the 1998 Minnesota Vikings. This was the world's introduction to Randy Moss. So the Vikings were already a good team and a playoff team. They had Chris Carter, Hall of Fame wide receiver. They had Brad Johnson and Randall Cunningham at quarterback. Robert Smith, great running back. They were an explosive offensive team. They drafted Randy Moss out of Marshall. Character concerns. Well, the only concerns that faced him in the NFL were how many touchdowns that he was going to score. He broke the rookie record, scored 17 that season, led the NFL. The Vikings blew through everybody, went 15-1, most dominant offensive team at that time. What made this team so special was that this was the first time that we were introduced to a wide receiver that could just outrun and outjump everybody. Like, this had never happened before, where a receiver was just better than everybody. There had been like really talented, really good receivers, obviously Jerry Rice's, Michael Irvin's of the world, but there was never a receiver that's just physically just a better athlete than everybody else on the field. That was Randy Moss. This team was really explosive. They were a dominant team throughout the season. Heartbreaking loss in the 1998 NFC Championship game to the Falcons, but this is still one of the all-time great offenses. Number four on my list. Number three on the top five offenses in NFL history, this is the 1984 Miami Dolphins. This is Dan Marino's second year in the NFL, teaming up with his Marks brothers. This is Mark Clayton and Mark Duper. And what was so special about this team, this was the first time a quarterback had thrown for 40 touchdowns in an NFL season. Marino threw 48. The first time a quarterback threw 5,000 yards in season, Marino threw for 5,084. Now, remember, like I said, this was the early 80s. This was kind of the dawn of major offensive football. Marino's stats were so dominant that it just outpaced everybody in the league. To put it in perspective, Aaron Rodgers was the MVP last year, throwing 48 touchdown passes. The difference between Aaron Rodgers and number two in the NFL was about 12 touchdown passes. The difference between Marino and the next guy on the list was about 20. Wow. So just the gap was massive, right? And the thing is, imagine in Rodgers' day and age to lead the NFL in passing yards, in today's NFL, the gap between Marino and the next guy, a modern NFL quarterback would have to throw for 6,600 passing yards in a season. That's how big of a gap it was between Marino and everybody else. He outpaced everybody. We've never seen a dominant quarterback compared to the rest of the league the way Marino was in that 1984 season, and I doubt we ever will again. The number two offense in NFL history on my list is the 2007 New England Patriots. So this was another Randy Moss special. This is where he broke the record for receiving touchdowns in a year. But this was really the first time that we saw Tom Brady with just elite weapons, right? He had won 3 Super Bowls with good receivers, but he had never had great talent around him. They had Wes Welker on that team. They obviously had Moss. They were just ridiculous. So they had Brady, who was very accurate, great decisions, move the chains, obviously going to score a lot of points, making a lot of good decisions with the football. And then they had Randy Moss, who, like I said, was just faster and could jump better athlete than anybody on the football field by far. And with that awesome combination of Brady's game management, accuracy, and decision making, and Moss's pure athletic ability, unmatched in NFL history. They went 16-0. Brady broke the record for touchdown passes in a season. Moss broke the record for receiving touchdowns in the NFL season. They fell just short in the Super Bowl, a heartbreaking loss. This was still a record-breaking offense and number 2 on my list. And now the number 1 offense in NFL history for me is the 1999 St. Louis Rams, the greatest show on turf. Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce. They just absolutely were the first offense to deploy 3 wide receiver sets and be that explosive and aggressive all of the time. So this was still back in the time period where teams, if they were backed up, they'd want to run the ball, those short passes, play it safe. Not the Rams with Mike Martz as their offensive coordinator. They took shots from everywhere. This was a team that they get 8 yards on first down and they throw a bomb on 2nd and 2. 3rd and 2, throw another bomb. They didn't care. They were so aggressive, and teams didn't know how to counter it. They spread teams out, opened up running lanes for Marshall Faulk. He was also an unbelievable weapon in the passing game. He was the second guy in NFL history to have 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards passing in an NFL season. I mean, this team was so great on offense. Kurt Warner basically had a Hall of Fame career essentially because of his short time with the Rams and the greatest show on turf. They ended the season with a Super Bowl win against the Tennessee Titans. Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce will probably find themselves in the Hall of Fame one day. Marshall Faulk already is. Kurt Warner already is, like I said. In my mind, this was the first offense to really bring in just absolute don't care, explosive. We'll throw the ball all over the yard. We'll take shots all the time. Just an absolutely unbelievable and just a really lightning fast, modern NFL offense. And I have them at number 1. That's the 1999 St. Louis Rams. And my honorable mention, they kind of just missed the cut for me. This was tough. 2004 Indianapolis Colts. I think what really special about this Colts team is that they were sort of the 2007 Patriots before the Patriots, right? They still ran the ball with Edgerrin James. They had Marvin Harrison. They had Brandon Stokely. They had Dallas Clark. They had Reggie Wayne. They had weapons everywhere. But they just, the NFL rules hadn't quite helped them out yet. They were still fighting those aggressive Patriots with all the hand chucking and the 5 yards and the physical corners that kind of hurt them in the playoffs. I think if that Colts team plays 5 years later, they're legendary because they were so good. This was Peyton Manning at the peak of his athletic powers, and he knew that offense ran by Tom Moore like anybody's business. They were so balanced, just so tough to stop. They blew teams out when they were on fire, but they just were a few years early, right? The rules hadn't quite caught up to where they were allowed to execute the way teams in the future would be able to, but still a great offense. I remember watching them shred teams on Thanksgiving, Detroit Lions. I remember them blowing out the Broncos, 45-21 or something ridiculous in a playoff game. And the Broncos were really good. This was a very memorable offense to watch. That's why I have them as my honorable mention.
It's great. There's a lot of crazy offenses on that list.
Yeah, I hope none of our listeners find our list too offensive, by the way.
Yeah, it's almost sinful for you to put Patriots at number 2 there. I think some people might be cussing you, but my list is different than yours, as always, but I think it's also a very good list. Let's start off my number 5, the 2016 Atlanta Falcons. This was an offense that at the time, at the ending of the season, they were second in the NFL at yards per game, averaging over 415 yards a game. They're third, almost 300 passing yards a game, 120 rushing yards a game, ranked 5th. First for 34 points a game average. It's pretty insane to average 34 points a game. This is offense with Matt Ryan, Devonta Freeman, Julio Jones. There's a bunch of other, like Tevin Coleman's here, and he played a big part. This was just an incredible offense for the Falcons. they couldn't get it done in the way of Super Bowls or anything like that. But this offense is very prolific, and I think this was like the last light years of the Matt Ryan, Julio Jones era. So it's kind of special to me to see, like this was the last time they were like truly, truly elite together before the duo separated. Number 4 for me, going a little back, 1989 San Francisco 49ers. You could really pick almost any 49ers team with Steve Young or Joe Montana, but this was a special one. This had Roger Craig at the running back, who rushed for over 1,000 yards. So that's pretty impressive. Running for 1,000 yards, that's great. That's great. But he also got 500 receiving yards. Joe Montana's there. He's slinging the football around, doing great things there as well. I believe this was one of his last years before Steve Young came in. Jerry Rice is there. He had over almost 1,500 receiving yards that season, 17 touchdowns. But then on top of Jerry Rice, they had another Pro Bowl receiver, John Taylor, who had almost 1,100 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. To have two guys getting that, like your tight ends getting 500 receiving yards, they were slinging the ball all over the park. This was one of the greater offenses that I was never able to see, but that I can remember in recent history. My number 3, this is one that I have seen. It's the 2011 New Orleans Saints. 2011 was a great year for offenses. It was a great year for prolific offenses. We'll dive into that a little bit later. But this Saints offense was really something special. Drew Brees as the captain of this offense, and I'm going to tell you some other parts of it. There's one part in particular that I would like to look at. So Drew Brees was here. He's doing great. They have Mark Ingram and Pierre Thomas and Chris Ivory as their primary running backs. Those guys are all great. You got Jimmy Graham, as always, top-tier Pro Bowl tight end. He's getting 1,300 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. You got Marquise Colston, another great wide receiver they have, 1,200 receiving yards, about 8 touchdowns. The part that I would really like to show here, this is what really made them special. Darren Sproles, running back and return man for the New Orleans Saints. Not only was Sproles running for 600 yards and 4 touchdowns, he was receiving for 700 yards and 7 touchdowns, and he was returning kicks as well. I think he was truly, you cannot miss guys like that in offenses. Like, if you pass those guys up, they're going to bite you every time. Darren Sproles was truly one of the most special parts of this offense that people never really remembered because he wasn't even nominated to the Pro Bowl that year. And if you're having almost 1,000 yards rushing, 1,000 yards receiving, and like almost 20 touchdowns, how are you not getting to the Pro Bowl? I think that's kind of crazy. My number 2, another 2011 offense. 2011 Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers does it again. We talked about how great he was early. He's probably going to win MVP again this season. Back-to-back MVPs for him. But this Green Bay offense, this was the year I believe they went to the Super Bowl. Or was it this year or was it the year after?
So it was the year after. This was the year they got upset. They went 15-1 this year, but they got upset in the playoffs by the Giants. And that loss actually is what Rodgers and guys like A.J. Hawk said motivated them, because they were killing everybody this year, like you said, in 2011. But they kind of let their guard down in the playoffs and got upset. But they used that to motivate their championship the following year in 2012.
So this was the year, but I think this year especially, maybe they didn't really have it quite together yet, and they need just that extra spark, like you said. But this was a great offense. You obviously got Aaron Rodgers, one of the greatest to ever do it. You have Greg Jennings, one of this trio of wide receivers was great. You got Greg Jennings, you got Jordy Nelson, you got Randall Cobb, but another key part we're not looking at. John Kuhn, one of the greatest fullbacks to ever play the game, is the anchor of this offense. If you ask anyone on that team, I think they'll tell you he's one of the greatest players they've ever played with. John Kuhn could catch the ball, he could run the ball, could score touchdowns either way, but he was an elite blocker and a big part of this offense. I think he really opened the holes for Ryan Grant and James Starks to, get the ball moving. Those were really their only two guys they had running the ball. But this is a great offense, and it carried over to the next year. But this is the year that, you got 3-4 Pro Bowl guys on this offense right here, and it was very, very special. But nonetheless, they weren't my number one, because my number one offense was another Peyton Manning-led offense, but not the one that you were talking about. This is the 2013 Denver Broncos. This offense, I was looking at the stats earlier, just mulling over some stuff. It was crazy. Noshawn Moreno rushed for like almost 1,100 yards, 600 yards receiving. Monty Ball, Ronnie Hillman, all those guys were great running backs on that team. Peyton Manning, incredible passing numbers that year, but they had like a ton of guys on the receiving corps who all were incredible. You have Demaryius Thomas, 1,500 receiving yards almost, 14 touchdowns. Eric Decker, 1,300 receiving yards. So 1,500, 1,300, 11 touchdowns. Wes Welker, 780 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. Julius Thomas, 788 touchdowns, 788 yards, 12 touchdowns. And then you remember guys like you remember Virgil Green, who came in after Julius Thomas. That guy kind of popped a little bit a few years after that. They had so many pass catching weapons on this team, and they all produced. It's incredible that Peyton Manning's able to spread the ball and give everyone stellar numbers that year. This was truly one of the most dynamic offenses I've ever seen. I remembered it because they hung 7 touchdowns on the Ravens one of the games that year, so I knew it was going to be something to not be sniffed at. I believe they did go to the Super Bowl, but they lost to the Seahawks, I believe.
Yeah, you're right. And it's a funny story about that. I remember they played Baltimore opening night. We were obviously at school together at the time, and Peyton Manning put 7 up on the Ravens. And I was kind of laughing. I'm like, oh boy, what an embarrassment for the Ravens. That's so bad. And then the Denver actually played Dallas that year and beat them 51-48. So,
at least you scored 48. We
yeah,
didn't really score much. Denver was crazy that year. It was truly a sight to behold. I'm not bitter. I'm not saying that they're number one just because they could hang 7 touchdowns on Baltimore's stellar defense, but maybe that is what I'm saying. And finally, my honorable mention. I'm surprised you didn't mention them because I think it's a team that really doesn't get the credit because they never got the wins. The 1990 Buffalo Bills. You got Jim Kelly. You got Andre. I can't remember what his last name was.
Andre Reed.
Andre Reed. This is just a crazy, crazy offense. This was right about the time. Thurman Thomas was another crazy, crazy running back that they had. And this is the time that the Bills went to all of those Super Bowls and they could never quite win anything. This offense, though, another great offense. I really was impressed. I like to focus on different aspects of stuff. 1,300 rushing yards, quite a lot of rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, but you also coupled with 600 receiving yards. That's almost 2,000 all-purpose yards. I mean, that's pretty impressive to me personally when you see numbers like that. So Jim Kelly was obviously a great quarterback, and Andre Reed was a great receiver. But this is my honorable mention of the top 5 offenses.
Yeah, that's a good list. So the Bills reference is great because there's 2 things about it, right? Is they called it the K gun was their offense. And it was one of the first really no huddle offenses that were very successful and went to the Super Bowl 4 times, obviously. But this offense, it was legendary. They were actually big favorites against the Giants in the Super Bowl that year. But that was the year that made Bill Belichick a household name because he was the defensive coordinator for the Giants at the time. And he came up with the game plan that limited that offense and allowed the Giants to win that in a big upset. So I think the only reason we have to put up with Patriots fans to this day all of the time is because the Bills couldn't beat the Giants on that Super Bowl Sunday. So that's why I can't list the Bills on my list, because every time I think of that team, I think about you're the reason we have to look at the Patriots and Bill Belichick.
If only they could have adapted.
If only they could have found a way.
I I got racks in my sack, hurt my back, yeah. They said, Saint Nick, what you got up in that bag, yeah. I got racks.